Hello friends, welcome back to CSharp.net online training video series. Today we are going to discuss one of the important concept which is related to exception handling. Today we are going to discuss inner exception in CSharp. So at the end of this video, what you will understand what is exactly inner exception, when we need to use inner exception, and how to use inner exception in your application development, right? So let's start the discussion. So first of all, we need to understand what is inner exception. See, inner exception actually it is a property of exception class, right? So if you go to the definition of exception class, then you will see that this is a property. Okay, let me go to the definition. How you can go to the definition? Right click on the class and select go to definition. See, once you go to the definition of exception class, then you will see that the inner exception it is a property. So and it is a read-only property. You can see only get accessor. Get accessor means it's a read-only property. What it means? It means you can only read this property, right? You cannot once you create an instance of this exception class, then you cannot set the value of this inner exception property. You can only read the value of the inner exception property, and it's a read-only property. And if you expand the definition, then you will see that this property gets the instance that caused the current exception, right? Further, if you read, right, what it is saying, an object that describes the error that caused the current exception, right? Okay, I have already copied the above statement into my document. So let me read from my document only, right? So what is inner exception means? First of all, it is a property available inside the exception class, right? As it is a property defined inside the exception class, so you can access this property from any of the child object. Why? Any of the child exception class, this property is available, and using the child exception class, you can also access this property. Why it is available? Because all the child classes, right? All the child exception classes, the parent class is going to be only exception class, as this is the parent class, and as this property is declared as a public property, so you can access this property using the child class instance, right? So now what is this inner exception property? The inner exception property gets the exception instance that caused the current exception. It returns an object, right, that describes the error. So when it returns an object, means it returns an object of one of the exception class that caused the current exception, right? The inner exception property returns the same value that passed into the constructor, or null if the inner exception value was not supplied to the constructor, right? This is the definition which is provided by Microsoft as part of their documentation. You can see this one, right? And you can see this is a read-only property. Now, to simplify this definition, what we can say, now when there is a series of exception, then the most current exception obtain the previous exception detail in the inner exception property. This is the most important property that we need to understand. What exactly is saying? The most current exception obtain the previous exception detail in the inner exception property. To understand this, let's assume that you are developing one application where from method 1 we are calling method 2. In method 2 we are getting one exception. Let's say we are getting divide by 0 exception, right? From method 1 we are getting this exception, and then from method 2 we are getting another exception. Let's say from method 2 we are getting this format exception, right? But remember, from method 1 we are only calling the method 2. In method 2 we have get divide by 0 exception, and from method 1 we are getting this format exception. Then in that case, the current exception, right? The current exception means in the try catch block of the method 1. So in the catch block, what exception it will catch? It will catch this format exception, right? Format exception. Then what about the actual exception which is caused in method 2? Divide by 0. You can get that divide by 0 exception from the inner exception property of the format exception object, right? Still you have no doubt, right? Don't worry, we'll try to understand this with one example. So once we discuss the example, then you will get a better idea. That means you will get a better idea what exactly this inner exception property, how we can face the older exception detail, or you can say the actual exception detail. We'll get better idea once we discuss the example. Right? Let us understand with one example. Let's say we have an exception inside a try block which is throwing divide by 0 exception, right? and the catch block catches that exception. That's fine. Then the catch block try to log that exception to a log file, right? So once the catch block catches the exception, he prepare one exception object, right, and one exception message, and he wants to write that exception message into a log file, right? However, while he is writing the message to the log file, he came to know that the file is not there. The existing file is not there. Someone deleted file. Then in that case, the catch block again going to throw file not found exception, right? Now let's outside the try block catches this file not found exception, right? From outside the catch block, right? Or you can say from the outer try block, it will catch that file not found exception. But what about the actual divide by zero exception that was actually thrown from the inner try block? Is it lost? No. The inner exception property of the exception class contains the actual exception. Still you have doubt? Okay, let's try to understand this with one example, and I'm sure after looking at the example, you'll get better clarity. Okay, let me copy the code, paste it on my editor. Okay, see. So first of all, what I'm trying to do, so first of all, this is my outer try and this is my inner try, and this is my inner catch block and this is my outer catch block, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm taking two input number from the user, right? I'm taking the first number, I'm taking the second number, and I'm trying to do the division operation. So in order to understand inner exception, first of all, you need to make sure that your try block is going to throw an exception, right? So in this case, what are the different way we can make sure that our try block is going to throw an exception? Three options are available. First option, instead of an integer number, right? Instead of an integer number, if you store a string value like ABC, ABC 1, 2, 3, right, alphanumeric or only alphabet, then you will get format exception. That is one way that from the try block we can send or we can throw format exception. Second issue is, okay, the second option is while entering the second number, if you enter the number as 0, right, from this try block, right, from this statement, it is going to throw one exception called divide by zero exception. This is another option to throw one exception from the try block, right? The another option is that we know for the integer number, there is some minimum length and maximum length. Minimum length and maximum length means minimum value and maximum value that you can store inside an integer, right? And if you want to know what is the minimum and maximum that you can store in int32, just right click on the int32, go to definition, and you will see that this is the minimum maximum value you can store in int32, and this is the minimum value you can store in int32. Suppose you are storing a number which is greater than this, or you are storing a number which is less than this, right? Then you will get overflow exception. So these are the three ways you can send or you can throw an exception, right? Once you throw the exception, then the inner catch block is going to catch that exception. And in this case, I'm using the exception class. Exception class means any kind of exception you throw from the corresponding try block, that is going to be kept by this catch block. Why? Because this is the parent class. This is the super class of all exception. Whatever exception divided by zero, super class or the parent class is going to be exception, right? Null reference exception, the parent class is going to be this one, right? Format exception, the parent class is going to be, so any kind of user defined exception, predefined exception classes you take into consideration, right? Directly or indirectly, exception is going to be the parent class, right? And as per our inheritance concept, right, we have discussed that one of the rule is that a parent class reference variable can hold child class object. So any child class instance or object you throw from the catch block, that can be easily stored inside this parent class reference variable, right? Suppose you throw divided by zero exception, then it will come to the catch block. It will try to figure out where the text file is. That means this is nothing but the file path of your text file. So currently I'm pointing to this location, D project log file, and the file name is log.txt, right? If you go to my D folder, D drive, project folder, inside that log file folder, I have one log file that is the name is log. And currently this log file doesn't contain any data. You can see the size is 0, right? So then I'm checking if this path is exist, right? File.exist means it will check whether this file path is exist on your machine or not. If it exists, it will return true, and in that case, this statement is going to be executed. If this file path is not exist, then that else part is going to be executed. Let's assume the file path is exist. Then what I'm trying to do, I'm creating one instance of the string builder class. Why? Now I'm going to append a multiple string. So instead of a string class, I'm going with a string builder, because string builder will give me better performance when I'm trying to adding multiple string, right? You can also use string, but with string you will not get better performance, right? In our string video, we have discussed what is the importance of string builder and how string builder can improve your performance, right? So for that particular reason, I'm using string builder, right? So in this string builder, I'm creating a string, and that string contains the message means what is the exception. So what is the reason for the exception? Source means from which class, right? This exception is belongs to project name. Help link, any help link is available, that will be stored in the help link, right? Stack trace means it will give you the exact location, right? Line number, program file, CS class name, method name, right? All the information you will get. Get type means exception type. Exception type means suppose divide by zero exception, so that divide by zero exception belongs to which namespace? System namespace. So here you will see system dot divide by zero exception, or system dot file not found exception. So that thing you will get, and this means only the name. Name means it will not give you system dot divide by zero exception. It will give you only divide by zero exception, right? Then I'm creating an instance of a stream writer, and to this instance, to the constructor of stream writer, I'm providing the file path where I need to write this content, right? So once I provided that file path, then it will create an instance of a stream writer, and where our string is stored. Our string is stored in string builder. Then I'm just calling the toString method, so it will convert that to string format, and that string is going to be written inside this log.txt file. What path we are providing, in that file only the string information is going to be created, and as soon as we complete our string writer work, so we need to close the string writer. So here I'm just calling the close method, and I'm just printing there is a problem, please try again later, right? Let's and this is working fine. Now let's assume that this string file path is not exist. Then if file path is not exist, then what we need to do, we need to throw one exception, right? And in that exception, I'm passing one message that file path doesn't exist, and the second parameter I'm passing as this one, this current exception. Let's assume the this exception is nothing but your divide by zero exception. That divide by zero exception instance I'm passing to this constructor, right? This file not found constructor, right? If you go to the definition of this class, right, you will see that there are few constructors available, right? And one of the overloaded version of constructor which is taking inner exception as a parameter, right? Inner exception means this is one of the constructor which is taking string argument. So any message you can pass, and this is nothing but your inner exception, and that you need to use, right? So I'm currently using this overloaded version. Even though if you go to the IO exception class, then you will see that one exception class is there that is taking message and inner exception, right? And even though if you go to the system exception, then you will see that that same constructor is available, right? And even if you go to the exception class, then also you will find that that same constructor is also available, which is taking message and a inner exception as a parameter. And remember, this exception what we are passing is nothing but the actual exception which is thrown from my try block, right? And in this case, what exception? It might be your divide by zero exception, it might be your file format exception, right? It might be your file not found, it might be your overflow exception, any exception. What is the reason why this whatever the exception it is cast, that exception we are passing as a parameter to this file not found exception, right? And you can see this file not found, and the first parameter is that I'm just saying the file doesn't exist, and the second parameter I'm saying the exception, the actual exception, or you can say the original exception detail. Again, here I'm throwing this one. So here I'm throwing this file not found exception means, so the outer catch block is going to catch that exception, right? So this is my inner try block, and this outer try block is going to catch that file not found exception, right? And this exception message, source, stack trace, it will give information about the file not found exception. What about the divide by zero exception which is actually thrown from my inner try block. How we can get that information? To get that information, we need to use the inner exception property of this exception instance, right? So currently this exception instance is nothing but your file not found exception, and in file not found exception instance, you need to invoke this inner exception, right? See, before invoking the inner exception message, source, and stack trace properties, because see, this inner exception, it is nothing but one class of type exception. Exception means you can also having this message, source, and stack trace, all these properties. But before accessing this, you need to make sure that this property is not null. Because if it is null, then again you will get null reference exception. So I'm checking if the inner exception is not null, then I'm only fetching the message, source, and stack trace. And after printing this, I'm ending the method. Right now, let us try to run this application and see different outputs. So, but remember, this is the inner exception property, and this inner exception property will hold the data what we pass here. To this constructor, we are passing the second parameter as a exception class, exception instance. What exception? What this catch block get? What this catch block get? This catch block cat divide by zero exception. That divide by zero exception we are passing as a parameter to this file not found exception, and inside this outer catch block, that divide by zero exception we are getting from this inner exception property. So whatever you pass, right? So this is nothing but, if you go to the definition, then you will see that this is nothing but your inner exception, right? So whatever exception you are passing, that will be set inside the inner exception property of the current exception. This is nothing but your current exception. Current exception is nothing but your file not found exception, and the inner exception is nothing but your divide by zero exception. Right now currently this file path is exist. Right, so this file path is exist means once you run the application, right, then we will not get that inner exception, right? Because the cache block is going to handle the things, and that is going to be logged into the text file. Suppose I'm entering 100, I'm passing the second number as 0, so that the inner exception, so that the try block is going to throw divide by zero exception, right? As soon as type this, you can see there is a problem, please try later, and main method. So that is fine, this method is executed, right? This code is executed, so you can see this statement is printed, and after printing this statement, it will come out to the cache outside of all the cache block, and it will print this statement. Now if you check the log file, then you will see that the information is logged. Attempted to divide by zero, exception handling demo. This is the project name. This is the region of the exception. There is no help link available. Stack trace means either error is causing in the program.cs class file, line number 25, and inside the main method, right? And get type means this divide by zero exception belongs to which namespace? System namespace, the fully qualified name. Only name means divide by zero exception. That is fine. So we have understood this. Now how to make sure that this thing is going to be executed? To make sure this thing is going to be executed, we need to make sure that this file doesn't exist. Then how will make sure that this file doesn't exist at log.txt file? Let me rename this. So what I'm doing, I'm renaming this file. So as I'm renaming this file, so currently when this condition will check, this path is not going to be returned true. It will return false. False means this else block is going to be executed. So in this else block, so I'm setting the message property, right? As well as I'm passing the current, the original exception, that is divide by zero exception, right? Now let's run the application and see the output. So currently I'm passing 100. I'm passing the second number as 0, and as soon as I press enter, you can see the outer catch block is executed. Right now, let me check the exception data. Right, so you can see, so help link is not available, right? Message is this one, this d.project.log doesn't exist. You can see this is the file path. File path means d.project.logfile.txt does not exist. So what we set in the message, right, what we are passing to the constructor as a first parameter, that will be going that will be stored in the message property. So you can see this, right? And then we are passing the second parameter, and the second parameter is nothing but our divide by zero exception. Now if you look at the exception, and if you check the inner exception, then you will see that error. attempted to divide by 0, right? Now, if you expand the inner exception, then you will see all the information attempted to divide by 0, where exactly the exception occurred, and what is the stack trace, all the information what I'm showing here, it is the inner exception detail. Right now, if you see, so this is the outer exception, the current exception detail doesn't exist, right? Current source is exception handling demo, current source is this one, right? And here you can see this is the inner exception detail. Message attempted to divide by 0, source is this one, and stack trace is this one. So this is how you can use inner exception in your application. And one more thing, what is the thing that before accessing the inner exception, right, detail, you need to make sure this inner exception property. Otherwise, you will get some kind of error again, runtime error. Okay, to understand this, what I'm trying to do is I'm just making this as uh, I'm just commenting these two statements, and here I'm not passing the second parameter, right? And I'm not passing the second parameter means the inner exception property in this case is going to be null. And on the null object, right, you cannot access these properties. And if you access, we already know what kind of error we will get. We'll get null reference exception. And in this case, the program execution is going to be terminated abnormally, right? Let me run the application. Let me enter the second number as 0, right? So, the application is running fine. Let me press F10, printing the outer exception detail or current exception detail, that is fine. Now I'm trying to print the inner exception details, right? Currently, if you look, right, exception object, right, then you will see that the inner exception is null. You can see the inner exception property is null. And on a null property, how you can access this? See, you can see this is going to throw system.null reference exception. Now, if I press F10, then I will get one runtime error, and this error I'm not handling, right? So because this is the catch block, from a catch block we are throwing this error means this is not going to be handled because there is no more outer catch block which can handle this exception. So this is the things that you need to remember. So before accessing the before accessing the inner exception of property, so you need to make sure that it should not null. If null, then you will get some kind of error, right? So currently, if I run the application, then I will not get any error because even though I'm not passing the passing the exception detail, right, in the even though I'm not passing the exception detail in file not found instance, right? The inner exception property I'm checking here, right? Inner exception property means I'm checking if it is not null, then only you execute this thing. If it is null, then just skip the things, right? So you can see now I'm executing the step by step, right? Now it is checking inner exception property, and in this time the condition is going to be false, and is false means it will not execute the body, and it will just come out and execute the rest of the code. So this is how you need to work with inner exception in your application, right? That's it for today. In the next video, I'm going to discuss the last concept of exception handling, that is exception handling abuses. In case you need the text version of this document, in case you need this document, right, then the link for the same is provided in the video description section. Just go to the link and get the document. Thank you for watching this video.